I never thought buying a house with a pool would become the most stressful decision of my life. When I moved into the neighborhood last year, the backyard pool was supposed to be my personal escape from work stress and city chaos. I imagined lazy Sunday afternoons floating with a cold drink, the soft hum of cicadas in the background, and the occasional neighborhood barbecue with my friends. What I didn't imagine was becoming the unwilling lifeguard for my neighbor Karen's kids who seemed to think my backyard was a public water park. From the very first week I moved in, I noticed them peeking through the gaps in the fence. At first, it was harmless. I even smiled and waved a few times, thinking they were just curious about the new neighbor. But curiosity soon turned into chaos. The first real incident happened on a Tuesday afternoon when I got home from work and heard splashing in the backyard. I thought maybe one of my friends had dropped by unannounced, but when I opened the back door, I saw 3 kids, none of whom I had ever met, screaming and jumping into my pool. Their clothes, towels, and shoes were scattered all over my deck like a tornado had passed through. I was so stunned that for a moment I just stood there, unable to believe what I was seeing. Finally, I shouted, "Hey! What do you think you're doing?" The kids froze like deer in headlights, then scrambled out of the pool and ran toward the fence. Before I could reach them, they were gone, climbing over like practiced escape artists. My pool water was cloudy, my deck was a mess, and there was a trail of wet footprints leading to the grass. I immediately went next door to talk to their mother, Karen, whom I hadn't officially met yet. She opened the door with an exaggerated smile that looked more forced than friendly. I introduced myself, explained that her kids had just been in my backyard, and politely asked her to make sure it didn't happen again. To my surprise, she didn't apologize. Instead, she rolled her eyes and said, "Well, you have a pool. Kids are going to want to swim. What do you expect me to do, lock them inside all summer?" I tried to stay calm and replied, "I expect you to tell them that my property is not a playground. It's a liability if something happens to them on my watch." Her fake smile disappeared, replaced by a scowl. "They're just kids. Don't be so uptight," she snapped before slamming the door in my face. That should have been the end of it. Most reasonable neighbors would have gotten the message and kept their kids out of my yard. But Karen wasn't most neighbors. Over the next few weeks, the trespassing continued, sometimes when I wasn't home, sometimes when I was. I installed a security camera overlooking the pool, thinking that would be enough to scare them off. It didn't. Instead, I started getting footage of them sneaking in almost daily, sometimes bringing friends, sometimes eating snacks on my patio furniture, and always leaving a mess behind. One day, I even caught them dragging one of my deck chairs across the yard to use as a makeshift diving board. That was the last straw for me. I decided to escalate things. I printed out a few still shots from my security footage and brought them over to Karen's house, thinking surely she couldn't deny the problem when faced with photographic evidence. When she opened the door, I calmly said, "Karen, this is getting out of hand. Here's proof your kids are in my pool without permission. If this keeps happening, I'm going to have to involve the HOA or even the police." Her reaction was explosive. She snatched the papers from my hand, crumpled them up, and threw them back at me. "You think you're better than everyone because you have a pool? You don't own water, buddy. If you didn't want kids swimming, you shouldn't have bought a house in a family neighborhood," she shouted so loudly that a couple of other neighbors came outside to see what was happening. I didn't argue back, I just turned and walked away, more furious than I'd been in years. But that night, as I sat staring at the grainy security footage on my laptop, I realized I had to take this more seriously. Karen clearly wasn't going to discipline her kids, and I was one slip and fall away from a lawsuit. So, the next day, I went to the hardware store and bought a taller, sturdier lock for the gate. I even put up a "No trespassing" sign and another that said, "Private property, violators will be reported." I thought that would do the trick. For about a week, it actually worked. No kids, no noise, no mess. I finally got to enjoy a peaceful weekend by the pool, and I let myself think that maybe the problem was solved. I was wrong. One Friday evening, I came home from work to find the gate wide open and wet towels hanging from my fence. My stomach sank as I realized what must have happened. I stormed into the backyard and found Karen's kids, and two of their friends, still in my pool. This time I didn't yell. I just pulled out my phone, took a video of them in the act, and said, "Stay right there. Your parents are going to see this." The kids panicked, scrambling out of the water and running for the gate, but I already had my proof. I dried off my phone, downloaded the footage, and emailed it to the HOA board with a detailed complaint. That weekend, the HOA sent Karen an official warning letter. I thought that would finally scare her straight. Instead, it only made things worse. The very next day, she marched over to my house, pounded on my door, and screamed, "Did you seriously report me to the HOA?" When I calmly said yes, she launched into a tirade about how selfish I was, how community spirit meant sharing, and how I was traumatizing her kids by making them feel unwelcome. Her rant lasted several minutes before she stormed off, muttering about how she would handle this her way. And she did. From that point forward, it felt like a war. My trash cans mysteriously got knocked over at night. My mailbox got egged. Someone left a pile of wet pool toys on my doorstep. Karen's kids would stand in their yard and yell insults over the fence whenever I was outside. I even caught them spitting into my pool once, which meant I had to shock it and clean the filter. My once perfect backyard had turned into a battleground. I couldn't relax in my own home without worrying about what would happen next. By midsummer, I'd had enough. I sat down one evening, staring at my pool while the sun went down, and made a decision that would change everything. I was going to get rid of it. Not because I couldn't fight back, but because I realized I didn't even enjoy it anymore. The pool had become a source of stress instead of relaxation. I wanted my peace of mind back more than I wanted to float around on a hot day. So, I called a local contractor, got a quote for filling it in, and scheduled the work for the following week. And that's when things really blew up. The morning the contractors arrived, I felt a mix of relief and dread. Relief because this was finally happening, no more trespassing, no more screaming kids, no more late-night stress. Dread because I knew Karen was going to absolutely lose her mind when she found out. The crew showed up just after sunrise, bringing with them a small excavator, dump truck, and a loud jackhammer that echoed across the neighborhood. The first blow of the jackhammer shattered not just the pool concrete but also the fragile piece I had left. By the time the crew had started tearing into the pool deck, Karen came storming out of her house, barefoot, wearing a robe, and already screaming at the top of her lungs. "What do you think you're doing?" she shouted, waving her arms like a traffic controller. The contractors ignored her, as I had instructed them to speak only to me. I stepped forward, hands in my pockets, trying to stay calm. "I'm getting rid of the pool," I said matter-of-factly. "It's my property, and I'm done dealing with the constant trespassing." Karen gasped like I had told her I was demolishing a playground for orphans. "You can't do this," she yelled. "My kids need this pool. This is their summer." I couldn't help but laugh, probably not the smartest move. Karen, your kids have a community pool 2 blocks away. This isn't a public park. I don't owe them free access to my backyard." Her face turned bright red. "You're a selfish, bitter man who hates children," she spat. "You're ruining their childhood because you can't handle sharing." Before I could respond, she turned and stormed back to her house. I figured that was the end of it for the morning, but I was wrong. Half an hour later, a police car rolled up to my driveway. 2 officers stepped out, looking slightly annoyed, as if they already knew this was going to be a petty call. I greeted them politely, explained that I was having my pool removed, and showed them my property deed and the contractor's permit. The taller officer sighed and said, "Yeah, your neighbor reported a destruction of property in progress. But this is your property, so you're good to go." Karen appeared again, standing on her porch and shouting, "You can't just let him do this. He's doing it out of spite." The officer calmly told her that I had every right to modify my property as long as I had permits, and if she kept interfering, she could be cited for harassment. The look on her face when she realized she wasn't going to get her way was priceless. But if Karen couldn't stop me legally, she was determined to make my life miserable while the work was being done. Over the next 3 days, she made a point of coming outside every morning to yell insults at the workers, telling them they were destroying a neighborhood treasure, and accusing them of ruining property values. She even called the HOA president, who stopped by to check the permits. Once he saw everything was legal, he shrugged and left, but not before giving me a look that said he secretly agreed with my decision. By day 4, the pool was completely filled in, leveled, and covered with fresh soil. I decided to turn the space into a low-maintenance garden with some grass, a fire pit, and a few Adirondack chairs. It already felt more peaceful just looking at the empty yard. But Karen didn't see it that way. She saw it as the ultimate betrayal. That evening, just as the last contractor packed up his tools, Karen marched over with her kids in tow, pointing at the filled-in yard. "You've ruined everything," she shouted. "Do you know how many memories my kids had in that pool?" Her son, who couldn't have been more than 10, chimed in with, "You're mean." I knelt down to eye level with him and said, "I'm sorry, buddy, but this was never your pool. Your mom should have explained that." Karen grabbed him by the shoulders and pulled him back. "Don't talk to my kids," she barked. "You're a bully, and I'm going to make sure the entire neighborhood knows what you did." I shrugged. "Go ahead," I said. "Most of them already saw your kid sneaking into my yard on camera." That made her shriek in frustration before storming back to her house. I thought that was going to be the end of the drama, but Karen had one more move left in her. The next morning, I woke up to find a handwritten sign taped to my mailbox that said, "Child hater lives here," in big red letters. My trash had been knocked over again, and someone had thrown water balloons filled with what smelled like spoiled milk all over my driveway. That was it for me. I called the police, showed them the security footage, and filed a formal harassment complaint. The officers took it seriously this time, warning Karen that if the harassment continued, she could face fines or even misdemeanor charges. That finally seemed to shut her down, at least for a little while. The rest of the summer passed without any major incidents, though Karen continued to glare at me whenever we crossed paths. Her kids stayed out of my yard, probably because they had nowhere to swim anymore. For the first time since moving in, I felt like I had my home back. But the story didn't end there. Karen wasn't done trying to make me look like the bad guy. A few weeks later, I started hearing rumors from other neighbors that I had poisoned my pool to keep kids away, that I had violently threatened Karen's family, and that I was mentally unstable. At first, I laughed it off, Anyone who knew me knew it was ridiculous, but eventually, the gossip started to bother me. I realized Karen was trying to turn the neighborhood against me. So, I decided to fight back in the most unexpected way possible. I hosted a neighborhood gathering. Planning the neighborhood gathering was my way of taking control of the narrative. I wanted everyone to see that I wasn't the grumpy, child hater Karen painted me as. If anything, I wanted to prove that I could be a good neighbor who cared about the community, but on my own terms, not by having my yard invaded. So, I set a date for a Saturday evening and went all in. I rented a few long tables, some outdoor string lights, a portable speaker system for music, and even a small grill setup so I could host a proper barbecue. I sent out invitations to every house on the block except Karen's. Not because I wanted to be petty, but because I knew if she came, she'd cause a scene. Word spread fast. By Thursday, several neighbors stopped by to say they were excited for the event. "It'll be nice to actually get together," said Mrs. Hughes from across the street. "We haven't done a block party in years." That was exactly the kind of feedback I wanted. I spent the next couple of days cleaning up the backyard, arranging chairs in a circle around the new fire pit, and even planting a few flowers along the edges where the pool used to be. The transformation was incredible. What had once been a source of anxiety now looked like a welcoming space. When Saturday arrived, I was ready. By 6 o'clock, neighbors started trickling in with side dishes, drinks, and even a few extra lawn chairs. Soon, the backyard was full of people chatting, laughing, and eating burgers fresh off the grill. Kids ran around playing tag, couples relaxed near the fire pit, and for the first time since moving in, I actually felt like I belonged. The best part? Everyone kept complimenting me on how nice the yard looked without the pool. "Honestly, this feels better than before," said Mr. Allen from 2 houses down. "Safer for the kids, too. You did the right thing." Hearing that made me realize just how many people had been silently annoyed by Karen's antics but never spoke up. Of course, Karen couldn't stay away forever. About an hour into the party, she came storming out of her house, arms crossed, glaring at everyone like they had committed some kind of betrayal by being there. She didn't step foot into my yard, but she stood just outside the property line and shouted, "Really? You all are just going to act like this is normal? He took away the only pool on the block, and you're rewarding him for it." Some of the neighbors turned to look at her, but no one said anything. It was awkward for a moment until Mrs. Hughes calmly said, "Karen, this isn't about the pool. It's about coming together as a neighborhood. If you want to join us, you can bring a dish and sit down." Karen looked like she had swallowed a lemon. "I will not sit down with someone who traumatized my kids," she shrieked. "You people are all just encouraging him." When no one came to her defense, she stormed back inside her house. I thought that would be the end of it, but within 15 minutes, I saw her on the phone through her kitchen window, pacing back and forth. 10 minutes later, the flashing lights of a police car appeared at the end of the street. The entire party fell silent as the cops walked up. "Evening," one of them said. "We got a call about a disturbance, loud music, possible harassment." I kept my cool and invited them into the backyard. "Officers, we're just having a barbecue," I explained. "Here's the permit I got from the HOA to host an event." They glanced around and saw families sitting, eating, and chatting. The music was playing softly in the background, hardly what anyone would consider a disturbance. "Looks like a normal neighborhood get-together to me," the taller officer said. Karen came marching out again, waving her arms. "He's harassing me by throwing this party. He's trying to turn everyone against me." One of the officers gave her a long, tired look. "Ma'am, from what I can see, he's just having a barbecue on his property. That's not harassment." She tried to argue, but the officer held up a hand. "Ma'am, we've been out here before. Unless you have proof of an actual crime, you're wasting our time." The entire backyard was quiet as Karen realized the cops weren't taking her side. With a final huff, she stomped back into her house and slammed the door so hard it rattled the windows. As soon as the police left, the backyard erupted into applause. The tension that had been hanging in the air broke, and everyone went back to enjoying themselves. A few neighbors even joked about how Karen was probably watching through the blinds, seething. I have to admit, it felt good, not because I wanted to humiliate her, but because I finally felt like I had won. Not by yelling, not by stooping to her level, but by showing the rest of the neighborhood who I really was. The party went on late into the evening. People stayed longer than I expected, and by the time the last guests left, my yard was full of empty plates, soda cans, and the smell of burnt marshmallows from the fire pit. I didn't mind the mess. In fact, as I sat in one of the chairs staring up at the stars, I realized this was the first time in months that I felt completely at peace. The pool was gone, the drama was over, or so I thought. The next morning, I woke up to find a fresh sign taped to my fence, "Pool Killer." This time, instead of getting angry, I laughed. I knew Karen was just lashing out because she had lost control. And I also knew I had the upper hand now. The neighborhood had seen the truth. The cops had been to my house twice and sided with me both times. Karen could throw all the tantrums she wanted, but she couldn't touch me anymore. Still, I decided to take things one step further. If Karen wanted to keep escalating, I'd make sure every step she took only made her look worse. After the party, things went quiet for about a week. I thought maybe, just maybe, Karen had finally given up. But Karen wasn't the type to surrender gracefully. Her silence was just her winding up for a bigger strike. The first sign came on a Thursday afternoon when I returned home to find an official-looking envelope taped to my door. For a second, my stomach sank. Had the HOA decided to punish me after all? I tore it open and started laughing almost immediately. Inside was a neighborhood petition written in Karen's unmistakable handwriting, claiming I had destroyed a vital community resource by removing the pool. She had collected a total of 3 signatures, hers, her husband's, and one other neighbor I barely knew. She had written a demand that I restore the pool or face neighborhood action. I actually framed the paper and hung it in my garage as a reminder of how absurd things had gotten. But I knew that this was only the beginning. Sure enough, 2 nights later, I woke up around 2 a.m. to a strange noise outside. I grabbed my phone, turned on the camera, and quietly stepped out onto the porch. There, under the dim glow of a streetlight, was Karen and 2 of her kids. They were standing in my yard, dumping buckets of water onto the freshly planted grass where the pool used to be, chanting, "Bring back the pool," over and over. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but then I realized this was actually happening. "Karen!" I yelled. "Get off my property right now." She jumped, clearly startled, then pointed her finger at me like a villain in a bad movie. "You can't stop us from protesting," she shouted. "This is free speech." "On my property? At 2 in the morning? No, it's trespassing." She hesitated for a moment before dragging her kids back toward her house, yelling something about me being a tyrant. The next morning, I called the police yet again, showed them the footage, and they gave me the green light to file for a restraining order if the harassment continued. But Karen wasn't done. Her next move was her boldest yet, and honestly, the most dangerous. A few days later, I came home to find my fire pit full of what looked like burning trash. Someone had lit it and left it smoldering. Luckily, nothing caught fire, but it was clear this was no accident. I checked my security footage, and sure enough, there was Karen's oldest son tossing a bag of paper into the pit and running away. That was the last straw. I immediately printed out the footage, drove straight to the police station, and filed a formal report. The officers took it very seriously this time, calling Karen in for questioning. She tried to claim that her son was just cleaning up the yard as a nice gesture, and had accidentally set something on fire. The cops didn't buy it. They issued a formal warning and told her any further incidents could result in charges. When Karen got back home that evening, she stood on her porch and glared at my house for a full minute before slamming her door shut. I thought that was the end of her antics, but no, Karen had one final, ridiculous plan. That weekend, while I was mowing the lawn, I saw her putting up flyers on all the mailboxes in the neighborhood. When I got closer, I saw that the flyers had a giant headline, "Say No to Pool Killers." Underneath was a dramatic paragraph about how I had robbed the children of joy and turned the neighborhood into a barren wasteland. She even included a picture of her kids looking sad next to my yard. Instead of getting angry, I laughed so hard I had to sit down on the porch. The absurdity of it all had gone beyond annoying, it was almost cartoonish. But what Karen didn't realize was that her flyers were actually helping me. By this point, nearly the entire neighborhood was on my side, and they saw the flyers for what they were, a desperate attempt to rally sympathy. One by one, my neighbors started coming over, shaking their heads, telling me not to worry about it. Some of them even took the flyers down themselves. Then, the most unexpected thing happened. One of the neighbors, an off-duty police officer named Dan, came by and offered to organize a community mediation meeting. "This has gone on long enough," he said. "If she wants to turn this into a public spectacle, let's have a public resolution. Everyone can come, and we'll settle this once and for all." I agreed, partly because I wanted closure, partly because I wanted to see how Karen would react when faced with the entire neighborhood. The meeting was set for the following Wednesday evening in the community center. Word spread quickly, and by the time the day arrived, nearly every house had promised to send at least one person. When I walked into the community center that night, I felt a mix of nerves and excitement. There were folding chairs arranged in a circle, a table with water bottles, and a few members of the HOA sitting off to the side. Karen was already there, sitting with her arms crossed, looking smug, as if she thought she was about to win a popularity contest. When Dan called the meeting to order, Karen immediately launched into a speech about how I had unfairly destroyed the neighborhood pool, and how my actions had traumatized innocent children. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't raise my voice or get defensive. Instead, I calmly laid out everything that had happened from the day I moved in: the trespassing, the warnings, the security footage, the vandalism, the police reports. I even brought printed photos and videos as evidence. The room was completely silent as I finished my presentation. Then Dan turned to Karen and asked, "Do you deny any of this?" Karen shifted uncomfortably but didn't answer. That's when Mrs. Hughes spoke up. "Karen, we all saw your kid sneaking into his pool. We all heard you screaming at the contractors. This isn't about the pool, it's about you refusing to respect someone else's property." Several other neighbors nodded in agreement. The smug look on Karen's face faded, replaced by something I had never seen before: embarrassment. Dan wrapped up the meeting by suggesting that we all move forward peacefully, and that any further harassment would result in legal action. The neighbors clapped, and just like that, it felt like the entire neighborhood had turned a corner. But I knew Karen wouldn't go quietly, not yet. There was still one last twist coming. After the mediation meeting, I thought things were finally over. The neighborhood had spoken, the evidence had been shown, and Karen had been publicly embarrassed in front of everyone. For a few days, it was quiet, eerily quiet. Her kids didn't play outside, she didn't glare at me from her porch, and there were no fresh signs or flyers anywhere. I started to think maybe, just maybe, she had learned her lesson. But deep down, I knew Karen well enough by now to expect a last-ditch attempt at revenge. It came 1 week later, and it was her most extreme stunt yet. I woke up early on a Saturday morning to the sound of shouting outside. When I looked out the window, I nearly choked on my coffee. Karen had set up a giant inflatable kiddie pool in the middle of my front lawn. She had filled it with water from her hose and was sitting in a lawn chair like it was her personal property. Her kids were splashing around, laughing, and she was holding a sign that said, "Community Pool Reopened." I stormed outside, incredulous. "Karen! Get off my lawn!" She didn't even flinch. "This is a peaceful protest," she said smugly. "If you won't give the kids their pool back, we'll make one ourselves. This is for the good of the neighborhood." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're trespassing. Right now. Call the cops," she said, smirking. "They won't do anything. This is a public demonstration." So I did exactly that. Within 15 minutes, 2 patrol cars arrived. By now, the officers knew me and knew the situation well. One of them walked up, took one look at the pool, and said, "Ma'am, you can't set up a pool on someone else's property." Karen jumped up from her chair and started ranting. "This man destroyed the only pool in the neighborhood. My kids have nowhere to swim. We're just trying to make a point." The officer stayed calm but firm. "Ma'am, you've been warned about trespassing before. This is your last warning. Pack up the pool and leave immediately, or we will cite you for criminal trespassing." Karen's smugness evaporated. For a moment, I thought she might actually comply, but then she made the worst decision she could have possibly made. She started screaming at the officers, accusing them of taking my side, and refused to move. When they told her again to leave, she shoved one of the officers. That was it. The officers immediately placed her under arrest. Her kids started crying as she was handcuffed, screaming that it was all my fault. I stood there in shock, watching the entire neighborhood gather on the sidewalk to witness the spectacle. Mrs. Hughes came over and patted me on the shoulder. "You didn't do this," she whispered. She did it to herself. Karen was charged with trespassing and resisting arrest. She was released later that day, but from that point on, she avoided me entirely. She didn't glare, she didn't yell, and her kids no longer came anywhere near my property. It was as if the fight had finally been drained out of her. In the weeks that followed, my life slowly returned to normal. The yard started looking better than ever, the fire pit became a regular hangout spot for my friends, and I even began to host small neighborhood cookouts once a month. The same neighbors who had once been skeptical of me now treated me like a pillar of the community. Eventually, Karen put her house up for sale. When I saw the "for sale" sign go up, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, satisfaction, and even a little pity. I didn't hate her, not really. I just wanted peace. When the moving truck finally pulled away a month later, I stood on my porch, took a deep breath, and felt the kind of quiet satisfaction that only comes after a long, hard battle. My backyard may not have had a pool anymore, but it had something much better: peace, freedom, and a sense of belonging. I had turned what was once a nightmare into a victory, and even though it took months of chaos, police visits, and Karen's endless tantrums, I had finally reclaimed my home. And the best part? The next time I hosted a barbecue, several neighbors joked about how glad they were that the neighborhood pool had been closed permanently. We all laughed, clinked our glasses together, and I sat back in my chair, smiling. Because for the first time since I moved in, I finally felt like I was exactly where I belonged.